the biggest regulation reduction in the history of our country, which as farmers, you know what that means. It means a lot of good things. We made the small business tax deduction permanent, benefiting 98% of America's farmers and ranchers. And thanks to bonus depreciation, farmers can now deduct 100% of the cost of new tractors and all equipment in the first year. In other words, you buy a tractor, you deduct the whole price. Normally it goes over a 38-year period. This is slightly better. You got these tiny little deductions that weren't even worth it. Now you can do it at one time. Importantly, we saved 2 million American farms from extinction by virtually ending the unfair estate tax. We've ended the estate tax, or as they call it, the death tax, and you can now keep your family farms in the family. We had a problem. See, these are all people that are clapping that love their children. If they didn't love their children, they wouldn't care about what I just said. But most of you, does anybody not love your child? Because that would be the one person that would have clapped the other way. No, it's a big thing. I would see farmers, and they pass away. They love their life. They love it. There's something about a farmer, maybe more than anybody else. They love that. They love the soil, and they love their farms. And they'd pass away, and they'd have wonderful children, and the children would get hit with this massive tax bill for the value of the farm. Sometimes the farm is very valuable, but the cash isn't so readily available. And they'd go out to a bank and they'd borrow money, and they'd borrow and borrow and borrow to pay the tax. They'd be working for 20 years to pay it off. If they had a bad season, they'd lose their farm. We lost it many, many times. And you'd have actually many, many suicides over it. They would actually commit suicide because they couldn't stand the concept of losing their family farm. And I ended the death tax, or the estate tax, on family farms and small businesses. So I think you're now sending over $40 billion in American soybeans to China. I want to thank President Xi of China, because we had a deal at 20, and I said, could you do me a favor? It's a big place. Could you double it? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, could you make it 40 instead of 20? And he overrode all of his people. He said, all right, I'll do it. And you got 40 instead of 20. Last month, we issued a major new rule declaring that farmers have a right to repair your own equipment. Can you believe that one? And that action will save the typical farmer up to $30,000 on major repairs. And I'll explain it in a second, because we had a ridiculous Washington restriction called the so-called diesel exhaust fluid requirement. Do you know about that? It was a basic disaster. Today, we're announcing new guidelines drastically limiting these ridiculous DEF rules, saving farmers and consumers billions and billions of dollars. And when I was in Iowa recently, I met a man who was the chairman of John Deere, great company. And I asked him, I said, could I ask you a question? We cut a lot of the restrictions, almost all of them, on cars. What have we done for tractors and trucks and different things that you use on the farms? He said, sir, they never got to us. They never did that. I said, well, we're going to have to, that was about 2 months ago. We've worked very hard, and Lee is working on that. It's a top priority. I told him, Lee Zeldin, a top priority. So when you buy a tractor today, you spend 50% of your time fixing the environmental impact statement garbage that's on the tractor. In fact, I buy a lot of things that having to do with farm equipment, where I own clubs and other things. And I said, give me 10-year-old equipment. Do you have any 10-year-old equipment that hasn't been used yet? And whenever they had it, I would buy it, because it was much better than the new stuff, which has so much environmental nonsense on it that it ends up costing thousands of dollars more to produce, and it doesn't work well. Too complicated. And then you'll get somebody that is a farm worker, and he's looking at heavy computerized environmental equipment, and you have where the tractor will turn off if the environmental equipment isn't working. It was an automatic turn off. It did absolutely nothing for the environment. It cost you $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a machine. And to save fuel, many of you are working over massive deposits of fuel. To save a quarter of a glass of fuel this much, just a little bit, they'll have 2 extra computers in it that never worked. And I said to the head of John Deere, is this a good thing or a bad thing? He said, sir, you have no idea how bad it is. It's made our tractors so complicated. You need a major degree from MIT in order to turn on a tractor. We want to go back to the old way, sir. And I said, I agree with you 100%. And we are working very hard and very quickly to get rid of the horrible chains placed on tractors. For gasoline prices for farmers and consumers, this week I issued an emergency order to allow immediate sales of E15. And just as I promised in the campaign, I'm seeking congressional action to allow E15 all year round, okay?